Hello, I'm Craig Lieberman. If you don't know who I am, you're not alone. I'm a gearhead who's been tinkering on cars since the 1980s. I've owned more than 40 cars in that time, but I never dreamed that some of my own cars would star in a major movie franchise. My R34 GTR, my Toyota Supra, and my Nissan Maxima all had starring roles in Universal's first two Fast and Furious movies, and I served as a technical advisor to these early films. I've raced open wheel cars, shifter cars, and others. I love all things automotive, and my videos help me share my passion with like-minded people all around the world. Owning a classic Skyline is a dream for most people. Getting your car cast in a Fast and Furious movie is a dream for pretty much everybody. So you can imagine what happened when one fellow who owned a classic HKS Skyline got a phone call to have his car get featured in Tokyo Drift. Let's go back in time to the year 2005. Fast and Furious 1, the first movie, had been out for a few years. Too Fast, Too Furious had come out 2 years earlier, and both of them were a bit of a surprise. And now, here in 2005, Universal had decided to make yet another sequel. This one was going to have a storyline revolving around drifting, which was all the rage at the time. After the success of the first two movies, you can imagine the excitement when Universal put out a broadcasting call for cars to be used on set for one scene in particular, the underground parking scene. Your phone rings, and you've been invited to have your car appear in this movie. What do? Well, if you're this fellow named Wayne, you're so happy, you happily agree to drive 3,000 miles across the country just to get this tiny little role as a background car in this garage scene. Not only that, when the producer says to you, hey, would you mind painting your car from white to black so that it doesn't get all freaky with the lights that we're going to have on set at nighttime, you agree to do that. Good, you're in, right? The big day comes and your car is placed on set with an elite group of rare and expensive JDM cars, some of them flown over from Japan just for this movie. And just as final preparations are made to start filming the scene, your car catches on fire. That's what happened. The car was wheeled off set and it didn't ever return. As heartbreaking as this was, there's actually a lot more to the story. Even the backstory is pretty interesting. And the backstory started way before this car was cast for Tokyo Drift. It seems Wayne had purchased this car while living in Okinawa, Japan, while he was serving there in the Marine Corps. As it happens with a lot of service people, they fall in love with these cars and try and bring them home with them. The car was originally silver, but Wayne had painted the car white while the car was still over in Okinawa. That in and of itself was pretty controversial. You don't change the factory color of a collectible car. But the story gets more interesting when Wayne decided to export this car. He apparently angered some local Yakuza to the point that threats were being made to his life. Apparently, the Yakuza viewed this car as an important piece of Japanese history, but by the time the Yakuza's threats reached Wayne, the car was already halfway across the Pacific, and so he was out of the woods. Fortunately, Wayne was careful enough to follow all the importation laws when bringing the car to the USA, and so he's had no issues even after the motor wreck scandal. And if you don't know about that, watch my video on it, it's pretty good. At the time, the car had a Datsun L28 engine, but the internals had been beefed up and the compression ratio was 13.5 to 1. It had triple 44mm Mikunis, an N42 cylinder head, and a direct port nitrous system. So with all the mods put together, Wayne says the car made about 165 horsepower before the nitrous. And again, this was a pretty nice car, even though it wasn't a GTR, it was just a Skyline. And so Wayne, as you can imagine, was pretty excited when he got the call from Universal telling him that they wanted to use the car in Tokyo Drift. Everything was set for the car's appearance in Tokyo Drift, and then of course he had the fire. However, the director, Justin Lin, was so enamored with this car that he actually included it in the script. Wayne was paid $250 a day, even though the car never appeared on camera because of the fire. But I had to get to the bottom of the fire story, and Wayne explained exactly what happened. At some point, one of the grips accidentally stepped on the glass fuse box and it started a small carpet fire. At that point, the car was wheeled off set and they just couldn't fix it fast enough to get the shot, so the car was out of the film. And that would have been the end of the story. The car went back to Wayne, and I didn't hear anything else about this car until this year, 2020, some 15 years after Tokyo Drift. That's when Wayne explained to me that it was actually his HKS that was the car that was used in Fast 5. So I immediately got on the phone to him, and we had a discussion. Not knowing the full story, I was glad to reconnect with Wayne through his friend Javier Tirado to get all the details. This is where it gets interesting. It turned out that back in 2010, when Universal's work on Fast 5, John Weiser was once again tasked with finding right-hand drive Japanese cars for the film. John did this for many of the Fast and Furious movies, even going back as far as the first movie, so everybody knew John. John remembered Wayne HKS from Tokyo Drift and reached out to Wayne to see if there was any chance he still had that car And if so, could it be used for a scene in Fast 5? A deal was struck, and before long, Wayne's Skyline was loaded onto a boat in Jacksonville, Florida, close to where he lived, and shipped off to Puerto Rico. By this time, though, many changes had been done to the car. The engine at this time was now an FJ20ET from the DR30 Skyline, and this one had a 9.5-to-1 compression ratio. But this engine was turbocharged, while the original L28 that he had in the first go-around was not. Go-Fast bits included many things: an HKS MLS head gasket, ACL race bearings, total seal rings, stock pistons and rods were used for this application, a GTX 3576 R-Spec turbo. All of this together made 255 horsepower at 5 psi. There were other things like a Pulsar GTIR front-mounted intercooler, jet hot-coated exhaust manifold, intake manifold, and valve cover. Brakes were just 4-pot calipers with endless pads front and the stock drum rear brakes. And that pretty much rounded out the mods. For those who don't know, several scenes were shot for Fast 5 in Puerto Rico, Atlanta, and of course in Brazil. The car arrived safely, so there was no problem, but at one point, John Weiser finally called Wayne on the phone. He was a little concerned about answering the phone given what happened on Tokyo Drift. On the other end of the line, though, was Paul Walker himself, who was so in love with this car that he offered to buy it on the spot. Wayne politely declined Paul's offer with the promise that if he ever decided to sell the car, Paul would be offered the car first. So the car remained on set to complete its appearance in Fast 5. Unfortunately, the car had another minor incident on set in Fast 5. This guy's got terrible luck. As you can see in this picture, a camera mount was added to the front of the car. This is pretty typical to film the actors' faces. While grips are usually very careful, they are used to mounting the equipment to cars other than the Hero 1 car. But since we only had one car, the lights would need to be rigged to this car. Some slight damage was done to the front fender and in the engine bay, all of it cosmetic, thankfully. But wait, there's more. Apparently, the car also had a minor incursion bumping into something on set. The damage looked slight, but it was enough to push the front fender a bit closer to the door. Wayne tells me that there was no frame damage done, just a little bend that was easily fixed. But after filming in Puerto Rico, the car went to Brazil to do more filming and then to Atlanta. In total, Universal had the car for 6 months. So he was getting paid per day, worked out pretty well. The car is now back in Texas safely and now in the hands of Javier Tirado for more upgrades and more updates. Honestly, it's not unusual for cars to get damaged on set. It happened to my Maxima, my Supra, and several cars on the set of Tokyo Drift. It just happens. It's not always their fault. Sometimes it's the extras who are walking around the cars. To Universal's credit, car owners are almost always paid out for their repairs with no problems. It's a tragedy that this car had so little screen time, but it's a victory that the car finally made it to the big screen. Especially now given the fact that it has appeared in the greatest car movie franchise of all time. Thanks for watching again, everybody. I hope you will take the time to subscribe to my channel. We'll see you next time.